Hi, hello, I'm Ever, and this will be the reading of a fic titled The Clairvoyant Boy by Marilyn Mayhem on AO3. Before I start reading, I just want to warn you that I am a bit sick, so this might sound a bit off. I apologize for that. Yeah. Chapter 3 The, the Ghost of a Boy's Sleep Schedule. Hours later, the final bell had rung, and Izuku was free to make his way home. He walked in front of the school gates, deciding he would much rather walk home than take the train. Izuku disliked the train. It was crowded, loud, and filled with ghosts. Izuku really didn't mind the ghosts, but when he was surrounded by a lot at once, he tended to freak out, always worried that they would decide to attack him, and nobody would be able to do anything about it. He had been attacked a few times before, and because Izuku was the only one who could touch the ghosts, nobody could help defend him. He had ended up lying in the middle of a sidewalk, being shredded apart by a being nobody else could see. Izuku shuddered at the memory and continued to make his way down the street, making a quick pit stop at Def Arms Agency and dropping off Dumble's analysis. He made sure to avoid all the people and cameras so he could keep his identity under wraps. He then made his way to a nearby cafe. It was one he had never been to before, so he was excited to try it out. A bell jingled when he pushed open the door, and Izuku was immediately tackled by a small black critter. Izuku yelped in surprise as the black ball of fur began to crawl up his leg, beady yellow eyes staring him down. Izuku slowly reached out a hand to pet the cat, but he was immediately bitten. Wincing, Izuku pulled his hand back, keeping eye contact with the cat clinging to his pant leg. He tried again, this time slowly lowering his hand to the cat's head. His endeavor proved to be successful, as the cat did not bite him, and just started purring when Izuku began to stroke its head. Izuku's head snapped towards the checkout when he heard a small gasp. A teenage barista was staring at the cat, her green eyes wide. That cat never let anyone do that before. That cat never let anyone do that before, she said in disbelief. Izuku offered a sheepish smile. I guess she just likes me. He continued to scratch her head, letting her stay on his pant leg. The purring from the cat helped ease Izuku's usual anxiety. He would have considered getting a cat if he was home more often, but he was worried he wouldn't be able to provide the proper care for one. The barista laughed, her long ginger hair swaying with the movement. Maybe you should take her home. All the cats here are rescues and looking for a permanent home. She's been here the longest because she bites everyone that walks through the door. Izuku didn't know how to respond, so he offered a small chuckle and scooped out the cat. He made his way towards the booth and sat down. Do you guys have coffee here? The barista finished tying her hair into a bun. What kind of cafe doesn't have coffee? Would you like any sugar or cream? Just sugar, please. The barista nodded and turned towards the coffee machine. Izuku adjusted the cut on his hip before pulling out his laptop and opening his emails. He sent out a quick email to Dumble to tell him the analyst had been delivered to his agency, then began to check the emails that had been sent to him. He deleted the useless spam emails he had, only saving one that was giving him a 15% off coupon, and began to read over the more important ones. There was an email from a hero asking for an analysis. Izuku sent back an email to accept the offer, also including the cost and arrival date. There was also an email from his school asking for an adult signature on a few documents. Izuku forged his mother's signature on a couple of the forms and turned in the documents. Just as he was about to click on the email from the detective, the barista walked over with his coffee. She smiled at him while placing his coffee down. "You go to UA, right?" she asked, pointing to the uniform he still had on. Izuku nodded, and the girl visibly perked up. "I do too," she exclaimed. "I'm the Hero Course, Class 1B. Janet, Class 1C. The name's Midori Izuku." He bowed as much as his sitting position would allow. The ginger bowed as well. "Kendo Itsuka. Nice to meet you, Midoriya." "Likewise," he replied, sitting back as Kendo did the same. Izuku then reached for his coffee and took a sip. The warmth helped warm his naturally cold hands. Kendo pointed to the counter. "I've got to get back to work, but I will see you around, Midoriya." She waved as she turned to walk back behind the counter. When she was a decent distance away, Izuku opened his email from Tsukuyoshi. The email was a request for help with a gang that the police had been trailing for a little bit. They were a huge part in the recent trigger outbreak, and they were very sneaky. Tsukuyoshi had sent a few clips of members they had caught on security cameras, but it wasn't nearly enough to identify the criminals. Izuku watched the videos a few times, picking out any details he could about quirks or appearances. He gathered the information into a sacred document and was constantly flipping between the documents and video clips to jot down anything he found. About an hour through, Izuku slammed his head against the table and groaned. There was one criminal that he couldn't get any information on other than their height, and that was not only not enough information to catch the criminal with. Finally, giving up on trying to find any information on the delinquent, Izuku sent the profiles that he had finished to the detective. He made sure to include a note letting the detective know that he had not been able to find anything on the last criminal, but he would be sure to have the information by tonight. Izuku backed up his computer and checked the cold remains of his coffee. With a small nudge, Izuku had kicked the cat off his lap. He felt a little bad, but he knew he would have to leave early in order to have time for a small nap. He stood up and returned the mug to the counter, waving goodbye to Kendo on his way out. He sludged home, fatigue already dragging down his bones. He dreaded the exhaustion that was yet to come, but Izuku knew he would be up all night trying to find the criminal. He really had been planning on getting a good night's rest, but alas, he knew he would be going out tonight. Izuku awoke to a loud alarm in his ear. He groaned and dragged his hands down his face. He lay there for a moment, contemplating the actions he had taken to end up in his current situation. The alarm kept blaring until Izuku finally rolled over and shut it off. He stood and immediately got to work, changing into black clothing he had bought specifically for these kinds of missions. He slipped the black mask over the lower half of his face and put a pair of dull sunglasses over his eyes. He took a moment to let his eyes adjust to the dark hue on of the glasses before crawling out of his apartment window, leaving the door locked and keys inside. Ever since he had left his mom's house and been forced to start providing for himself, Izuku had been always anxious somebody was going to stalk him out of his apartment and steal his keys. It was also a good safety precaution, for if he ever got caught doing something illegal, as the cops wouldn't be able to use his apartment keys to track down his house. A thump echoed in the highway when Izuku hit the hard pavement and began to walk down the street. He swiftly located his favorite fire escape and scrambled up until he reached the roof of the building. The cold wind bit at Izuku's ungloved fingers as he ran across the rooftops, his eyes scouring the streets below. The black hat on Izuku's head kept his hair from blowing into his face. The sunglasses kept dirt from getting into his eyes. Izuku was peaceful like this. Running across the rooftops always helped him clear his head and escape from the stress and his disaster of a life. The only thing he would change is the hat on his head. It was terribly itchy, but Izuku didn't want anyone to be able to track down his identity, even though what he was doing wasn't technically illegal. 2 hours later, Izuku had yet to find his target. He decided to take a quick break and munched on the granola bar he had tucked into his pocket. Izuku sat on the roof ledge, kicking his feet back and forth while enjoying his snack. His attention was quickly stolen by the clank of a dumpster. Izuku dropped his granola bar on the ledge and stood up as silently as he could. He crept towards the other end of the roof and peeked over the edge. Underneath, a large and dark-haired man was leaning against the wall. The man looked up and met Izuku's eyes. Izuku grinned when he saw a familiar face. It was his target, the man he hadn't been able to find any information on, which the teen assumed was because he was incredibly drunk. Izuku was almost tempted to go down and help the man, as he could see him swaying on his feet. Izuku quickly scanned the area around the man and was rewarded when he locked eyes with a slightly transparent lady. She had bright red eyes that had matched with the sequin dress she had on, and looked stunning paired with her long, silky black hair. She squinted at Izuku, and he waved at her. Both the ghost and the drunk man waved back, both extremely confused. Izuku straightened back out, effectively hiding himself from the view of the two below him. When the woman floated up to the roof, Izuku waved at her again. He smiled too, but the mask and sunglasses covered his face pretty well. Upon closer inspection, Izuku noticed she had slightly scaled skin and a forked tongue that would flicker past her lips every once in a while. He had to resist pulling out his notebook and drowning her in 1,000 questions about her quirk. "You can see me?" Tilting her head slightly. "Yep," Izuku replied, popping the pea. "So, do you want to help me tonight ruin this guy's crime career and get him thrown in jail?" Through experience, Izuku had figured out that just cutting to the case often worked better with ghosts than attempting small talk. Most ghosts hated their tethers so much that they would rather endlessly annoy them than have a conversation with a random teenage boy. Although Izuku really didn't blame them. He didn't like talking to people much either. The dead woman perked up. "Yeah, of course. What do you need?" "First off, I need to know why you're haunting him, so I know how far to go in my report, and how much should I ruin his life. And then, I need all his personal information." Izuku left out the part where if the man wasn't really awful, he wouldn't actually do anything. He doubts the lady would be willing to help him. If there was a chance, he would just steal the information and didn't do anything about it. Peeking over the ledge, Izuku made sure the gang member had not left. The criminal was leaning against the wall, singing some kid's cartoon song Izuku had remembered from when he was younger. The ghost nodded. That was his girlfriend. He was really sweet and caring when I loved him, and I loved him a lot. I was actually planning on marrying him one day. She softly smiled at her feet. But one day, I was getting ready for our date. My lipstick rolled under our bed. When I bent down to grab it, I found a bag stuffed with sugar. I assumed he had shoved it under there last night when he got home. I didn't know what to do, so I just asked him about it. He started getting really mad at me and wouldn't listen to reason. I begged and pleaded for him to turn himself in, and he wouldn't listen. When he pulled out his gun, I switched tactics, started begging for my life. The woman had started crying at this point. I told him I wouldn't tell anybody, and that he could just pretend everything was normal. I didn't want to use my younger sister. She was only 8, and she already had it hard enough with the nature of a quirk. He did it anyway. He shot me, and then called his friends to get rid of the evidence. My family still doesn't know what happened to me. My case went cold a few months ago, and I'm so mad at him for ruining my life, ruining my younger sister's life. I'll help you in any way I can. She moved her arms to hug herself. A look of fierce determination painted across her face. Izuku took his glasses off to smile at her, and she smiled back. The ghost reminded Izuku of an old neighbor he used to have before he left home. She was a sweet lady that lived just 2 doors down. Sometimes Izuku would watch her cat, and in return she would bake him and his mother cookies. His mother rarely let him eat any, but he was still grateful. I am sorry that happened to you. You didn't deserve it. If you want, I can check up on your sister. I had a really bad experience in school too, so I can help her with it. Help her not to feel so alone. All you have to do is tell me her name. The ghost blinked in surprise. She's older now, so I'm not super worried anymore, but I hate that I couldn't see her growing up. It was kind of you to offer, though. She smiled at Izuku. What information do you need in order to catch him? She jerked a thumb to point over the ledge. Oh, just some simple stuff to help the police find him, like his name, quirk, and even if address if you have it. Izuku explained. The woman nodded, and Izuku pulled out a notebook. The ghost gave Izuku the man's name and quirk. Izuku really wanted to know more about the quirk, as it was an emotion-based quirk. The man could make anyone feel any emotion he wanted to, which would have been super useful for his time as a gang member. The lady also gave Izuku the man's apartment complex. She couldn't remember the number, but just the building should be enough for the police. Thanks for your help. He won't get away with this, I promise. Izuku assured the woman. No, thank you. I hope we meet again. She bowed to Izuku. Likewise, Izuku bowed back. See you around? Minamoto Himari. The ghost smiled. See you around. Izuku returned the smile and waved for the final time while walking off the roof. Hopping onto the building below, he made his way home, notebook tightly secured in his backpack. When he reached his apartment complex, he climbed through the window, and then he locked it behind himself. Izuku kicked off his boots and stripped himself of his dark clothes and mask. Once he was in his pajamas, he emailed the information he had gathered to Tsukauchi. As soon as the email was sent, he crawled to his bed and collapsed. The next morning, Izuku groggily trekked to school. He was somewhat regretting staying up late the other night. He was making a habit of showing up to school exhausted. He wouldn't be surprised if he passed out while walking to school. Anyone who knew Izuku would know that he was exhausted, as he didn't even stop to analyze the cool quirk he had passed by. When Izuku turned the corner to the school gates, he immediately stopped. In front of the school, there was a crowd of reporters. Izuku could spot a few ghosts hanging around too. Dread began swirling in Izuku's stomach. He hated crowds. There were too many people to keep an eye on, people that could grab him or touch him, and it was 10 times worse with the ghosts, because if one of them grabbed him, nobody would be able to help him. Izuku fiddled with his fingers, not daring to get closer to the sea of people. He could spot a few of his classmates getting swarmed, and he really didn't want to end up like any of them. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, just waving and his eyes unseeing. But eventually, Izuku's panic was broken by a boy trying to talk to him. Hey, you okay? You looked a little freaked, man. The boy was blond and had a black lightning ball-shaped streak across his bangs. Besides him stood two girls, one with jacks hanging from her ears, and another with shorter brown hair. All three of them were wearing the Hero Course uniform, which Izuku could immediately tell due to the button on their shoulders. Izuku took a second to collect his thoughts before pointing and shaking a finger towards the crowd of reporters. I don't like crowds. His breath was still coming to him in short bursts, but not as badly as before. Yeah, I can relate. I despise people. The girl with the earjack responded. We can probably find a different way in. She twisted a finger around one of the jacks, twirling it in a spiral. The brown-haired girl frowned. How though? I know there aren't any more doors, as our senseis told us that yesterday. Izuku swallowed nervously before speaking. We could try getting over the wall. I don't know how that would work, though, what are your quirks? I got electricity, not very helpful in this situation, unless we want to electrocute all of these reporters, the yellow boy said. Izuku had to physically stop him from asking the boy a million questions, so instead he just nodded along to what the boy was saying. Mine's pretty obvious. I can hear things really well with these. The girl pointed to jacks on her ears. I don't know how that will help us get over the wall, but Araka's quirk will probably be the most helpful. The girl in question sheepishly rubbed the back of her neck. I have zero gravity, but I can't use it on myself or I can get really sick. I could lift you three with no problem, though. Izuku nodded and propped a finger on his chin. Ruka's quirk would be really useful for getting the three over the wall, but he didn't know how they would end up getting her over. They would need a rope or something to pull her up with. Can I borrow your blazers? I think I have an idea. He pointed his finger that had been sitting on his chin to the sky. The three handed their blazers over to Izuku, and he immediately began tying them into sturdy knots. It was a skill he had picked up through watching YouTube tutorials and had proved to be really useful in the past. Once he was sure the knots would not budge, he walked over the UA wall. The Hiroker students wordlessly tried behind him. Izuku then turned to Uraraka. I need you to tie this around your waist. So I would let you do it, but I am assuming I have more experience tying knots. Unless you're secretly some knot tying expert and I'm just some random high school kid that watched too much YouTube as a child. Izuku joked, attempting to shake his remaining nerves. Oraka quietly snickered. No, I trust you to tie it more than I trust myself. Knock yourself out. She spread her arms to give Izuku easier access to her torso. Izuku made quick work of tying the blazer rope again around her, before tying the other ends to his own waist. Here's the plan, Izuku said, earning the attention of the other two teens that had been busy watching the reporters. Uraraka is going to use her quirk on the three of us. We are going to get to the top of the wall and she's going to release us. Then we can pull her up using this. He lifted the makeshift rope slightly. The other teens all gave a short, determined nod before Uraraka reached out to touch the yellow boy's arm. Izuku could feel his heart rate slightly spiked. The navy-haired girl glanced at him. Izuku could have guessed that Uraraka had a touch-based quirk, but he had been so busy trying to keep himself from freaking out that it had slipped his mind. He carefully watched as Uraraka went to touch the other girl's arm, and how she started to hover over the ground as well. Izuku smoothed his face when Uraraka finally came to use her power on him. He held out his arm and watched as she touched all 5 fingers to his pale skin. Izuku felt his gravity leave him as he began to float away from the ground and towards the top of the wall. He took a deep breath before paddling his way over to the edge and grabbed on. When all 3 students finally made it to the edge of the wall, Uraraka pressed the pads of her fingers together, whispering a quiet release. The teens tumbled to the ground as their gravity returned. Izuku quickly got to work, untying the blazers around his waist and passing the end to the other teens on the ledge with him. The 3 slowly but surely pulled the last thing up the wall, and they all collapsed on the edge, attempting to catch their breaths. Earful-Jack Girl was the first to get her breathing back to normal. She sat up, and Izuku could see a mask of disgust consuming her face. There goes Minada being a creep again, she grumbled, causing the other hero students to sit up and look in the same direction. Izuku sat up as well and looked down at the student that was being discussed. There was a short boy with odd purple balls on top of his head. He was making his way through the crowd and sticking his grubby little hands up skirts as he did. Izuku wrinkled his nose in disgust. There was absolutely no way that Perf was a hero student. The students beside him all had magic expressions on their faces. The girls looked slightly more uncomfortable than the electric boy did. Izuku smirked slightly when he got an idea. Get ready to jump, to the heroes in training beside him. Izuku then stood up, waiting for the other 3 to do the same before cupping his hands around his mouth and yelling as loud as he could.
Hey reporters! See that kid with the purple ball on his head?
Izuku waited till most of the reporters had eyes on the short boy.
Yeah, So that kid knows all my civilian name.
Chaos broke out as the reporters immediately began to crowd said boy, spewing questions a mile per minute. The small pervert looked horrified, and Izuku smirked. Okay, let's go, Izuku said to the bewildered teens beside them, and then launched himself off the side of the wall. The thud he made upon landing seemed to knock the hero students out of their shock, and they also jumped down from the wall. When all 14s were safely on the ground, Oraka turned towards Izuku. That was a really cool plan. I love what you did to the tiny creep, she said, smiling to Izuku. I'm Uraka Ochako, by the way. This is Jiro Kyoka and Kaminari Denki. He pointed to each person with her thumb as she said their names. I'm Midori Izuku. It's nice to meet you. He bowed slightly and the other teens followed. But we should probably start getting to class. We wouldn't want to be late. Yeah, Aizawa says he may actually expel us if we're late. She shuddered. All 14s began to walk towards their respective classrooms. Izuku split off halfway to make his way to the Gen Ed department. He really hoped it would be a laid-back class today. He was exhausted. And that's it for chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm once again sorry for my voice because I'm a little bit sick. I wanted to record it before, but earlier, but I didn't have time. Well, I couldn't record anyway, so didn't have one. But yeah, I hope you enjoy. As always, if you have any pointers, leave them at the comments. And yeah, have a nice day or night, and bye bye.